educated, smart, intelligent people who are working for a world that will not have breast cancer in it. The reason I asked them to come talk to you today is because I think research is really important to all of us. And sometimes we don't understand that. We're kind of disconnected from that. We either are experiencing breast cancer, or we're the daughter or the friend of somebody experiencing breast cancer. And we're in the midst of all that's going on with that, and we don't really realize how much research has played a part in minimizing the effects of breast cancer and helping us to create a world where breast cancer is very different in the future. So, to talk a little bit about that, I've asked 5 people to come up, and they are not sitting in the way I want them to sit. So we're going to try to do this the best that we can. The other thing is I'm used to calling them by their first names, and I'm pretty sure I have to call them all by doctor somebody today, so it scared me a little bit, but I'll try to do the best I can. Dr. Joaquin from France, and he really is from France, ladies. He is the first guy to my right, the only guy to my right, and he actually works for Susan G. Komen National. He lives in Nashville, but he works for National, helping them with their national grants. He oversees the research of Komen-funded projects. He works with the applications, which is the grants, and he also helps the review teams to look over those, and he also coordinates the peer groups to help look over those applications. He will explain a little bit more of what that means, but just for all of us, the easiest way I think of Jerome is that, as an example, Susan G. Komen Greater Nashville raises money that we utilize to fund local programs. 75% of which the money we raise stays here. 25% of the money we raise in Greater Nashville goes to research. That money is distributed based on a need and what's out there and what can generate the results that we're looking for. And so Jerome helps find those applicants, those researchers, and those people who can try to look towards those things that we have identified, we being, I don't know who that is, but somebody up there, what we need to do to create a world without breast cancer. And so Jerome is one of those individuals. Dr. Cook, who's to his right, actually works at Vanderbilt. And again, I'm going to let them describe a little bit more about what they do. But she is one of the recipients. She receives funds from Susan G. Komen to do projects. I know she's written 30 papers, is that correct? She's done a lot of publications. And she's also works a lot with our organization to try to identify women who potentially, mathematically, have the potential to get breast cancer, which sounds interesting to me in and of itself. So she can talk a little bit more about that as well. Next to her is Dr. How do I say your last name? Fingleton, like Singleton, but Fingleton. I keep on calling her Rebecca. I hope I can say this, she's a 2-time cancer survivor. Yay, we said that first. She also works at Vanderbilt and receives funding from Susan G. Komen National to do her research, and so she'll talk to you a little bit more about that as well. Next we have Dr. Michelle Martin Pozo. See, I can't do this. Anyway, Martin works with Komen National, and she's been there the longest. She's been there about 3 years, though she's been working in the breast cancer research arena since '97, I think, so a very long time. She helps determine both how helps new applicants apply for funding. She works through the peer review process. She manages grants. She also helps our organization write our press releases so we can talk to people about what research means and what it's doing. So she kind of helps in that regard, and I think that's really important to those of us who don't understand research speak. And then lastly, we have Betsy Wagner, who's the baby, and who's having a baby. She's the newest member. She also lives in Nashville, as does Michelle and Jerome, and she works for Komen Nashville with the same issues with the grants and trying to manage them and administer grants in our area. So before we start, let me just ask each of you, if you wouldn't mind, just real quickly, I gave you a real brief, broad spectrum of what they do, but can you talk a little bit about why you're in breast research and why it's important to you, why especially Komen is important to you? We'll start with Jerome, because he's here first.
Okay, everybody can hear me? So, I joined Komen in January 2011, and I came directly from the lab. So before that, I was doing breast cancer research for 7 years. By this time, I wanted to find a better way to actually not only do lab work, but also reach out to actually the real patients. I'm not a clinician, so I was kind of out of option, do better for them. But when the opportunity came for working for Susan G. Komen for the Cure, I really saw that as a perfect way to use what I've been trained as a scientist and actually give back to the community. So that was really an interest for me. Of course, like most of the people, if not everybody in this room, we've been touched by breast cancer one way or the other. Thanks actually to the very early work of Susan G. Komen, nowadays people talk about having breast cancer. So you start knowing everybody in your family that they know, and then before you know it, you know 20, 50 people who were touched by the disease. So that gives a really, really strong motivation to kind of wake up every day and do the work that I do. In terms of that, what is the work that I do? As Patty said, this is really focused on all the money that Susan G. Komen for the Cure is giving to research. And one thing to really remember is that it's not necessarily new. We are new to Susan G. Komen, but Susan G. Komen has been giving money to research from its inception in 1982. So that 30 years of grants that have been given to all those scientists around the world. So then really we need people at some point to actually look over that and make sure that the mission of the foundation is respected. So that's what I'm doing every day. Talking to scientists to receive our funds to make sure the research is going, what is the research, how much we can actually tell you what is happening in the labs. So that's a big part. And then making sure new people are applying for grants. So we have this new generation of scientists with, kind of a new views and new collaboration on breast cancer, also working with us to end breast cancer.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Cook. I came into breast cancer research fortuitously. My training is in developmental biology. I received my PhD in developmental biology from the University of Cincinnati. And so a lot of people don't know what that is, but developmental biology is the study of how organ systems develop. So how, for example, the breast becomes a breast. And it's a very complicated process that involves more than just breast tissue. But because I was trained in that field, developmental biology, when I joined Vanderbilt as a postdoctoral research fellow, I joined the lab of Dr. Carlos Ardiaga, who is one of the world's leading scientists in breast cancer research and is also a clinician who treats patients with breast cancer. And we combined both of our areas of expertise to understand the molecular regulatory controls that lie at the interface of breast development and breast cancer. So if we know how the breast develops and we know the consequences of breast cancer, my research is aimed at bridging that gap so that we can understand ultimately how to prevent breast cancer. So this is my pipe dream, is that we can prevent breast cancer. If we can prevent breast cancer, then we have cured breast cancer. That will be the only cure. But for the time being, we also need to focus on how we can improve the outcome of patients who have already developed breast cancers. So a large part of my research is focused on improving the current therapeutic strategies to treat breast cancer and to eradicate those that already exist. So we define the molecular events that are occurring in breast cancers and identify targets, molecular targets that we can develop drugs to, that we can then use to hopefully treat patients improve on morbidity associated with breast cancer treatments. So my job also has a number of facets that aren't involved in research. I'm dedicated to training our next generation of breast cancer research scientists. So I train graduate students and postdocs and make sure that they're as dedicated to eradicating breast cancer as I am, and that they have the necessary skills to write grants, to attack problems. And I also encourage them to engage in the community so that we can raise money for institutions like the Komen, so that we can spread awareness of breast cancer and encourage women to understand their breast health. I also am involved in peer review, so I try to gauge other people's grant applications, not for the Komen, that would definitely be a conflict of interest, but for other granting institutions, to make sure that the best research projects are being funded, those projects that can really have the most impact and create the greatest strides in breast cancer research.
I'm Barbara Pendleton. I'm also an assistant professor at Vanderbilt. I've been there, it seems like a very long time. Every time I say it, it's more and more upsetting. 16 years. As I said at the beginning, I don't like the word survivor, because to me a survivor is someone who's really clawed hard. I have had breast cancer twice. The reason that I don't like the word survivor is because it was a lot easier on me than it was on somebody 20 years ago who would have had breast cancer twice. And the reason it was a lot easier is because of the impact of Komen research, Komen money, Komen research, huge clinical trials, but also all the patients who participated in clinical trials. And that would be one thing that I would say to all of you and to anybody that you know. One of the ways that any of us can get involved in research without being in the lab is to participate in trials in any way that you can. Give information. If you're touched by the disease, be involved in it. Those are the kinds of things I think that all of us can do. Not to mention there's running and walking for the cure, which is one of the ways that I have to also say that Komen has truly helped me. It was the first run I ever completed. And that was just after my first breast cancer research. So my surgeon was standing on the sidelines as I ran by. It was fantastic. It really was fantastic. But get back to why I got into breast cancer. Not cancer at all. Cancer is a huge problem. There are so many things that are wrong in cancer. It's not something that we can just say, we'll find one thing. And I'm often asked, how close are you to a cure? We're not talking about one disease, even in breast cancer. We're talking about multiple diseases. There are multiple things going on. We all know there are lifestyle things we can do. Might not like to do them, but we know there are lifestyle things to do. But despite all those things, there are also molecular events that we don't understand. And as Rebecca said, that's what our labs do, try and understand what goes wrong, if there are drugs we can find. But I would say we're not only looking at ways to stop people dying from breast cancer, we've made a lot of strides in that. We're also looking at ways to make people who survive it have full lives afterwards. So reduce the morbidity as well as the mortality. That's really my goal. That's one of the reasons I really like Komen, because it thinks about the whole spectrum, not just the research.
So I'm Michelle Bozo. My story mirrors Jerome's quite well. So a little background, I got my PhD from Baylor College of Medicine in Houston in 1990s. Well, I started in 1997, so I can say, as Patty did, that was my first foray into breast cancer research. And as a young graduate student, you try and get an idea of what kind of labs and what kind of research you want to go into, and I happened into a breast cancer lab. And I not only really enjoyed the science, but I think the real turning point was for me was in San Antonio. They made all of us go to the San Antonio Breast Cancer Symposium, which for this audience, it's the biggest international breast cancer specific meeting that's held in the world. It's held every year in San Antonio. So as a young breast cancer student, I was asked to present some of my very young work at that time, and had two breast cancer survivors come up to my poster and say, okay, how does this work affect us? And so that was really my first foray into getting to interact one-on-one with breast cancer advocates and breast cancer survivors, and that whole process really impacted me to a point that I said, this is the community I want to stay in, this is the kind of research I want to do, and this is the community I want to deal with. So fast forward, I got my PhD and then moved here to Vanderbilt and actually worked with Barbara for Dr. Finkelman for about 9 years in the same lab actually, and I continued doing breast cancer research. And at the time I was trying to make a decision which many young researchers are making, which is, do I continue down the path to become a senior researcher, or do I utilize my training and my education to do something a little different but still have an impact? So I chose the latter, and it so happened that at the time I was trying to choose this, Susan G. Komen for the Cure, as Jerome said, has granted grants since 1982. That total from 1982 to 2012 totals nearly $755 million in breast cancer funding. As he said, that's a lot of grants, that's a lot of money, it really needs to be managed well. So in early 2010, Susan G. Komen decided to basically insource. It had been contracting out some of the management of its grants and its grant portfolio. And we decided to make the move to insource all of that, and to insource it utilizing PhD level scientists with breast cancer training experience that would know what these grants were about and how they should be handled. And you might be wondering why the three of us all live here, but we work for Komen National, which is in Dallas. The reason that is when Komen decided to insource, they didn't want to stick to any one geographical location. They wanted to open it up and have a remote-based team so that we could pull in some of the best talents or some of the best trained breast cancer researchers throughout the country. So we currently have staff that spans from California the whole way to the East Coast, training at several, and they were all trained at several of the big cancer centers throughout the country. And like Jerome, I'm responsible for a small portfolio of grants. I'm also involved in our communications department, which is messaging our message out to the community, i.e. what we are funding and how that impacts the community. And I'm also involved in the application and review process and responsible for scientific oversight of that process.
All right. Hi, I'm Betsy. And my story is very similar to Michelle and Jerome's, but I'm a little bit of a black sheep in that I got my PhD from the University of Arizona in Tucson in 2000, but my research focused on prostate cancer. But what I will say is that even though they're very, very different diseases, you can't study prostate cancer without constantly reading the breast cancer literature. Partly due to Komen-funded research, there's a lot of breast cancer research, a lot of literature about breast cancer that prostate cancer researchers are able to use to then find out more information and study prostate cancer as well. But because of that, cancer in general and breast cancer have always been very near and dear to my heart. And as I progressed through my career, breast cancer impacted me and family and friends a lot more. So I became even more and more interested in it. And similar to Michelle, I got to a point in my career where I was trying to decide, do I stay in the lab and try to become stay a young investigator and keep doing scientific research, or are there other aspects of my skill set that I can utilize to still have a very major impact on cancer research and still helping to make sure research progresses. So I'm going to skip over quite a bit of my career and say that my family decided to move to Nashville, and about a little bit after we moved to Nashville, I decided I really wanted to try to find a position where I could put my scientific skills and administrative skills that I use to very good use I really wanted to find a great organization to work for, and that was the time that Susan G. Komen for the Cure was also looking for people to manage scientific grants and help out with the application and review of their scientific grants. So I thought it would be a great fit, and they thought it would be a great fit too. So I've been working with Komen now since December, and it's been great. So for me, this is my first time being directly involved in breast cancer research, and it has been wonderful being involved with an organization that's done so much.
Hang on to the mic, Robert. So I'm going to brag for just a second, and I know that they've all alluded to it, but Susan G. Komen is the largest funder of breast cancer research next to the federal government. There is no one that even comes close. And so that's something I'm really proud of, and it keeps me very committed to Komen. Just in Tennessee alone, since 1995-ish, there's been more than, or almost $8 million in Tennessee from National. And right now, I believe there's 8 active grants, and it's right around $75 million right now here. And so what I'm trying to show you is that we are tied to national research. We are making a difference in Middle Tennessee, and when you think about giving to Komen or participating with Komen or volunteering at Komen, you are making a difference. And so one of the differences you're going to make is research. And so Betsy, can you talk to us a little bit about how research is different today than it used to be? And just real quickly, I think in the past we think of researchers as sitting in a little room and doing their research, and then if they got a good response, they were happy. If they got a bad response, that information just went into some black hole and no one ever saw it again. And again, that's a layperson saying that, but that's not at all what happens today or how we do research today. Can you just talk about that real quickly?
Yes, I will. So I'll try, and anyone who wants to interrupt, I'll pass the microphone to you as well. So yeah, I think in many ways scientists sometimes get a bad reputation, and sometimes that's portrayed a little bit in the media with our, mad, evil scientists, or, that can be the fictional media, and that can be the, the news media that can portray scientists sometimes inaccurately. So there's sometimes this conception that scientists do. They sit in their labs, they're in their little holes, and their tunnels, and they're doing their research, and they have their eureka moments, and everything else is not important. But in fact, these days, I'd say probably the last at least 15 years, team science has been becoming more and more important. And scientists, you don't find a scientist who goes into the lab or a researcher who goes into the lab and they come out at the end of the day and they haven't talked or spoken with anybody. They're constantly collaborating with people in the same lab, down the hall, upstairs, downstairs, in the building next door, and even across the country and internationally. They're constantly communicating with each other about their results and letting other researchers know what they're finding and what isn't working. So there really is a lot of just almost constant communication that's happening. And what the reason is that we found out that you get a lot more done when you get help from other people. 5 people working on similar things, even if they're doing it separately. 5 people sharing their results, whether they're positive or negative results, can accomplish a goal much quicker than one person working alone in their silo. So that's one of I think the biggest misconceptions about researchers.
And Betsy, with that, when what happens when a researcher finds information? They're trying to find information about breast cancer, but it really relates more to a different kind of cancer. What happens to that information these days?
Yeah, so a lot of that information, and scientists will publish the information in journals or present it at national conferences to their colleagues to let them know what the information is. But even a person who's working specifically on breast cancer research can't completely ignore all of the other different types of cancers that are out there. There are very many oils. So like I mentioned, I worked in prostate cancer, but read a lot of breast cancer literature. Because there are vast differences between different types of cancers, and yet there are similarities. And it's the communication between scientists that lets people doing the research pick up on, this is what Dr. Cook found in breast cancer, but this could relate to my colon cancer study that I'm trying to do as well.
Jerome, this question's for you. You mentioned real quickly young researchers and young scientists. Why is it important for us to engage young people in the research process?
Well, it's extremely important. The reason is, like anybody else, scientists love their job, but will not do their job forever. So at some point, they're going to retire. At some point, they're going to leave the lab and the research behind. So training is extremely important because not only this is the main ways to pass the know-how, like techniques, experiments, also what has been found over the last 30 years, to pass it on to the next generation. There's also a good purpose to it, which is to involve those scientists, not only in breast cancer research, but what it means. After all the work that everybody has done in making sure there's a purpose behind breast cancer research, which is to find a cure, this needs to be passed on. And I'm really proud of Susan G. Komen for actually doing that from the get-go. We have programs that are dedicated to training graduate students, postdoctoral fellows, and even some pre-graduate students to actually come into breast cancer research and stay there. So we actually started doing kind of a study to find out what was the impact of Komen in this type of training, and it's still kind of going on. But what I can say for sure from the different surveys of those people that benefited from our funds is that they said, without it, I probably would not have been able to go into breast cancer research. Not only that, but they said, without it, I probably would not be today a senior scientist doing breast cancer research. And the impact is real, meaning those people, once screened, are becoming, like Rebecca and Barbara, senior scientists, which actually would lead new people into breast cancer, will lead potentially to the next drug. So we really need to get early on to get them interested in breast cancer. So that's why it's one of our focus and why it's important to us.
So in 1972, my grandmother was diagnosed with breast cancer. So she had a lump. So what they did is they went in, they cut off both breasts, and she was done. And that's what they did. So today, that would never ever happen, we hope. So how has research made the difference? I mean, how do we now look at that there's different kinds of breast cancer and that all treatments are not the same and, you know, all that good stuff? How has research impacted our ability to identify what breast cancer is and how we're going to treat it? Anyone can answer that.
Yeah, I'll share the love on that one. So basically, there's one very easy point. Since I have the mic, I'm going to do it in the harder points of getting across. But the one thing is, back then, you had breast cancer, and that was it. Today, you have a type of breast cancer. And those types, we learn every day. You go to scientific conferences, and you learn that actually last year they announced that there was even more types than we first thought. Well, what that means is research. And I say that very strongly. Research is the only way that we've known about the different type of breast cancer. If there was not been research on it, we would not have known that the breast cancer of that patient or this patient was actually different breast cancer, completely different, to the point that, again, research showed certain drug will not only not work for that one, but maybe harmful for that one, but work extremely well in that case. So again, research was the key to it, and still is.
You guys, anybody else want to add anything to the impact? This next question is for Michelle. We have touched on this, but can you talk a little bit more about Komen's promise is research? I mean, that's what we are dedicated to doing, and we want to find a cure, and we want to be able to work with women who have experienced breast cancer and minimize their effects. So can you talk a little bit, and I know that sounds crazy, but what does breast cancer research really mean as from a Komen standpoint?
So I alluded to this earlier, that we've been granting grants since 1982 when Ambassador Brinker founded the Komen Foundation. And from that point to this point, as I said, we've granted over $755 million. That has been, and so I'm going to go off of what I started with, that has been, even the types of grants we funded has evolved over the years to mirror what he mentioned, how research has evolved over the years. So an early Susan G. Komen grant typically was associated with the basic breast cancer biology, what makes the cells grow abnormally, what makes them spread abnormally. And we've evolved since that point to really start funding more projects that have some translation to them, i.e. they have the ability to impact prevention of breast cancer, personalized treatment of breast cancer, early imaging of breast cancer, and those sorts of things. And we don't just pick those topics out of the sky, per se, when we release what's called a research funding announcement. We have a National Scientific Advisory Board that's made up of premier oncologists and clinicians from across the country. And actually, Dr. Carlos Arriaga is one of the members, and he was newly named to the board early this year. And so what they do from their breadth and depth of knowledge is they look across the landscape and determine what are those areas where our research funding could make the most impact. And we have gone towards a lot of grant funding now, like we were saying, personalized treatment. So breast cancer is not just breast cancer. We just can't give everybody the same medication. And as he said, it might be harmful in some people. So we've utilized some of our research funding for some researchers such as the two we have here to kind of parse out what types of breast cancer would be best treated by treatment X or treatment Y. So really, and again, we slightly changed those research focus areas as we've evolved over time to more greatly fit the needs as they are in the country and in the community.
Okay, I think this is the last question, and then we're gonna, if any of you do have questions, we'd love those. But to the docs at Vanderbilt, what do you need in order to do research funding? And research, what is it you need? And funding, of course, is the most important thing. So we know that. But what else do you need, and how, what else, from your perspective, or how else can all of us help?
Well, I'll start because I have a microphone. I have a feeling Rebecca has equally good. Yes, we need money, but we also need people to be involved. We need people to care, because this idea of sitting in a black box in a room, actually, if you've seen my office, I quite like that little hole. But yes, we do talk to each other, and we do a lot of collaboration, but we don't want to do work on things that nobody cares about. We work on breast cancer because women and men get breast cancer, suffer from it, and we don't want them to continue doing that. That's what we want to work on. So we want to hear what people really, really want. Would they prefer that we work on treatments? Would they prefer prevention? It's actually, you'd be surprised. We all know what prevention, things like not smoking and whatever. But if you really talk to people, a lot of people would prefer a drug rather than have to do a lifestyle change. We'd like to work on the education part to say the lifestyle change is a whole lot more sensible, but that really involves communication with people outside. So we need interaction, we need communication. We also need manpower, people. Rebecca talked about training and having people that come into our labs. One of the best things about having students, graduate students and postdocs who come in and really are the hands doing the work, they bring infectious enthusiasm. And that is really what gets things going. It's the best thing about having young people involved in any kind of scientific research is that they really want to get it done. And they come in, when you're coming in the morning going, oh no, the baby didn't implement, whatever, you meet this 20-year-old going, I had this great result, it's great. And it changes everything. So yeah, people is part of it. Obviously money, I'm going to keep saying that. Communication, and then there's all the space and all those kinds of things, which surprisingly enough is a lot harder to work on infrastructure than you might imagine. A lot of us are funded, we have, fortunately, places like Komen, but we also depend a lot on the federal government. The federal government is actually very restrictive in the kinds of things that it will allow us use funds for, because they're very, very careful about us perhaps using things for things that we shouldn't. So you'd be surprised at how difficult it is for us to do things like buy a computer. You can imagine any business, and a lab is a business, needs a computer to run. Well, it's really hard for us to buy those kinds of things. That's why other foundations, places like Komen really help us. But those are actually tactile things that people can really help with. You'd be really surprised.
I think Dr. Fingerton on all of the major points. We need funding. We need institutional support. We need community support, and we need awareness. If we're going to make great strides in breast cancer, we need people to know how to do a self-exam. We need them to know that exercise is good and that they should start getting mammograms in their 40s. And I've had mine. All good. And but we need advocates to keep us going, to give us perspective. And actually, Susan Komen Foundation has been really good about incorporating advocates into, for example, their review of grant applications. And so what that means is they have breast cancer survivors, people who have been through it themselves, saying, reviewing a grant and saying, I don't know how this is really going to improve my outcome, or this is really good, this is what I needed, and I would have benefited from this knowledge. And that model actually has been presenting a unified front against breast cancer is now the model by which institutions beyond the Komen have adapted so that the science is improved, is more tailored towards clinical translation. And so now we encourage our students and our postdocs to actually participate in the clinic with an oncologist so that they can get a good perspective on what this disease is that we're trying to end. So definitely funding. I have to say that the Komen Foundation funding that I received has been so beneficial as I've tried to get my laboratory off the ground. And it's a really kind of tenuous funding environment out there. And especially in this economic recession that we just went through, as taxpayer revenue has decreased and federal funding has really dropped off, it's been a wonderful cushion to know that the Komen Foundation is still providing the same level of support that they always have.
So I think we've run out of time, I hate to say this, but these people have a lot more to say. So if you have any questions or want to know more, please feel free to grab them after the meeting. And I want to thank them all so much for taking the time to be here.
I'm going to just stop and if any of you have a question, you take a